Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Most Accurate Podcast. I am your host, Addison Hayes, joined as always by one of the most accurate rankers in the entire fantasy industry, John Paulson. John, how are we doing on this fine Week 11 Thursday morning?
We're doing well. We're heading the back stretch here now in the fantasy season. Week 11, 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving. There's a lot going on. I'm starting to hear Christmas music when I go into stores. It's not pretty.
You know, I discovered something earlier today. I discovered I'm not all that different than Devontae Adams because I was in the shower this morning shampooing my hair and I ducked down. And when I ducked down to wash the shampoo out, my back spasmed. And I'm like, not that different. Old man syndrome. So that's that, which is essentially that's all that injury seems like. And it sounds like Devontae Adams is going to play, which is good. But when I saw that video, I just laughed because I was like, I know the exact feeling. Then it happened to me this morning randomly. So we are looking at Week 11 sneaky starts. So John and I have 2 players at each position for a total of 8 players that we believe are sneaky starts this week. Guys that we would like you to be able to try to find ways to throw in your starting lineup. Not that you should try to force them in your lineup, especially if you have somebody better, but that we believe these guys could have better than projected weeks for Week 11. So we'll just start at the quarterback position. John, I like where your head's at here already. He was on my short list for the video. So why don't you kick us off with your quarterback sneaky start for the week?
Yeah, I'm going to go with, there's a number of them in the article. So if you don't have the ability to pick this guy up and start him, maybe there's somebody else. But J.J. McCarthy for the Vikings against the Bears, who are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position this season. In the last 4 weeks, the Bears have given up an average of 294 passing yards, 35.5 rushing yards, and 2.3 total touchdowns to the quarterback position in that 4-week span. McCarthy obviously had a really bad game against Atlanta in his first home start. He was pretty good against the Bears in that comeback win in Week 1. He had 22.2, 18.9, and 14.7 in the 3 starts other than that Atlanta start. And his mobility adds another dimension. If things aren't going great through the passing game, he can run 27.5 rushing yards per game, 0.5 rushing touchdowns per game. So I think this is going to be a shootout, or it definitely has shootout potential with the way that the Bears defense and offense are playing. And I think the Vikings will have to, maybe try to keep up in this one. And McCarthy's a good play.
Yeah, I like it for sure, especially with the fact that it's at home. I like the home matchup a little bit better. It gives him a more friendly environment for him to do well against a rather porous defense this week. And maybe this is one of the games that kind of like how we pointed to for Week 1 against the Bears in that fourth quarter. Maybe McCarthy just kind of does that, but more over the course of the entire game. That would be nice. So my quarterback sneaky start this week is Tua Tagovailoa. He plays against the Washington Commanders in the Madrid game on Sunday morning. So we have another international game for us to wake up nice and early for. But that is going to be the Dolphins-Commanders game. So the Commanders, in case you're unaware, have an abysmal defense this year. They have allowed 5 straight quarterbacks and 8 of their last 9 opposing quarterbacks to throw for at least 250 plus passing yards and 2 plus touchdowns on them. Caleb only threw 1 touchdown, but he rushed for another touchdown. So he accounted for 2 touchdowns on his game log. And then they've allowed 4 straight quarterbacks to throw for more than 3 or more passing touchdowns on them. That includes Dak, Mahomes, Darnold, and Jared Goff over the last 4 weeks against the Commanders, all threw for 3 to 4 touchdowns and at least 260 yards, with the last 2 throwing for over 300. So this is a smash opportunity for Tua, who has kind of been up and down throughout the course of the year, but he's had his moments of 250 plus yards. He has a 4 touchdown game. And I just think against the Commanders defense that he can really just cut loose and take advantage of it. I love Jalen Waddle a lot this week. We can't throw him into a segment or a show like this for sneaky starts because he's not sneaky. But I think Waddle's going to have a great game. Achane can catch passes out of the backfield. Maybe Malik Washington gets a little involved. They have Nick Westbrook-Ikine, who did well last year on the Titans catching touchdowns. So, I think there's just a lot of opportunities for Tua with how bad the Commanders defense is for him to be a very streamable start this week and a potential high upside start if he is throwing for 303.
Yeah, I didn't write him up, but I did include him in a little blurb at the bottom, along with Jonnu Smith, who's got the Cowboys this week. So that's another sneaky one for you, bonus one. The interesting thing about the Commanders, and you kind of ran it down, but they're giving up, since that Caleb Williams game's 293 yards passing, 2.8 touchdowns per game. But if you look at just the last four, those guys are all pocket passers except for Patrick Mahomes, and they all went for 23 points or more as pocket passes, which is unusual. Usually you have to get some rushing yards in order to get to that sort of level. But with that many touchdowns, 2+ touchdowns, it's certainly some upside here for Tua this week.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned Geno as well. Geno threw for 290 and 3 on them and didn't have any rushing production on them either. So Penix had 302. Jordan Love had 290 and 2, only had 12 rushing yards. So the only two quarterbacks they've stopped this year are Russell Wilson in week 1, which is not very difficult to do. And then Justin Herbert, which I believe was the first week that Joe Alt was out and they really didn't have any offensive line, and that was at home for Washington. So those are the only two quarterbacks that they've stopped all year. Everybody else has been insane. So I like Tua a lot this week. Let's move on to the tight end position. And again, I like yours. He was on my short list for my list today. So why don't you start us off for tight ends this week?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Luke Musgrave. And, some people might roll their eyes at this one. He only had, 23 yards last week, but it was a really tough matchup against the Eagles. They were number 2, I think, in fantasy points, adjusted fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. He caught all 3 of his targets, and he also drew a 21-yard pass interference play as well. The Packers continue to be very banged up at receiver. It does look like they will have Romeo Doubs back, Christian Watson, and Dontavian Wicks again, but they're still without Matthew Golden and Jaden Reed. So, I think this will be a bounce back game for this offense a little bit. They can't be as bad as they have been in the last couple of weeks. So I'm hoping that there's a fire lit under them and that the Giants defense is not very good. So maybe Musgrave gets going here for maybe a 4 or 5 catch game, and who knows, maybe a touchdown. The Giants have given up 55 yards to Colson Loveland last week. Dallas Goedert scored 2 touchdowns back in week 8. So they've been they've had some good games against tight ends and some bad ones, but I think Musgrave will get lost in the shuffle and see several targets and catch 3 or 4, maybe 5 passes.
Yeah, and with Jameis Winston starting, you could think of this 2 different ways. With Jameis starting, is either there's a potential for a shootout game if Jameis just comes out and just throws for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, or there's a potential for a few extra drives or maybe shortened drives if Jameis is going to throw some interceptions. So we don't really know what we're getting with Jameis Winston this week. We never really know when it comes to him starting games, but it could be fun, and that uncertainty could come production for Luke Musgrave through multiple avenues depending on how the game actually ends up going. So I like Musgrave a lot this week. My tight end sneaky start is actually, I'm going for a duo of just the Steelers tight ends. They get the Cincinnati Bengals, who are 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed. And not only are they 32nd, which is dead last, but they are by far dead last against the tight ends this year. They're absolutely abysmal. And we also saw that in the first matchup between the Steelers and the Bengals just a few weeks ago, when all 3 tight ends found the end zone, and then Pat Freiermuth had his massive game that was highlighted by a 50-yard touchdown. So I'm not really in on playing Darnell Washington. You'd have to be in a pretty desperate situation to be playing Darnell Washington, but I do like the other 2 in Jonnu Smith and then especially Pat Freiermuth. Muth has had 3+ receptions in 4 straight games. Jonnu had 3 receptions through a solid stretch there, but then over the past game or 2, he hasn't necessarily had that production yet. But Muth has, and I think especially with the way that DK Metcalf has kind of fallen off a little bit, they don't really have any other receiving weapons in the sense that Calvin Austin hasn't done all that much. Roman Wilson has kind of had a couple big touchdown plays over the past few weeks, but there's not a ton of weapons for Aaron Rodgers to throw to. So with a matchup against the Bengals here with how bad they are against tight ends, and especially a game that, we could expect to be another, 60+ point game like it was in the first time with how good Joe Flacco is against the Steelers defense. There could be opportunity here for fantasy production for multiple of the Steelers tight ends, but I'll especially go for Pat Freiermuth, but I don't mind starting Jonnu Smith either.
Yeah, I wrote up Freiermuth. I completely agree with that one. I would be hard pressed to maybe to start Jonnu just given his involvement in the offense, but he could pop his head up for a touchdown and a pretty good game. He's athletic enough to break a run. He's a good yak guy, but they just haven't been using him as well as they did in Miami. Freiermuth has been more involved, as you mentioned. He did have 5 catches, 111 yards, 2 touchdowns against the Bengals. I don't know if you mentioned that
Right.
back in week 7. And I just looked it up. The Bengals have given up 12 touchdowns to the position this year. The next highest is 7. So they are like historically bad against the tight end position this season.
And I believe 4 of those 12 were against the Steelers in that Thursday night game a couple weeks ago. Muth had 2, Jonnu and Washington each had 1. So could be a similar recipe. At the running back position, then, John, why don't you kick us off here for running back's sneaky start for week 11?
Yeah, you might want to file this one under the more obvious sneaky starts, but I want people to feel confident starting with J.K. Dobbins out. R.J. Harvey should see an increased role. We think Dobbins is going to be, I don't think he's been ruled out yet, but this foot injury he had looked pretty bad, and I guess they've been thinking about putting him on IR, so I don't know how he plays through it this week. So R.J. Harvey likely to serve as a lead back. He probably won't be a bell cow. They've got Tyler Beatty and Jaleel McLaughlin, who they are fine using here and there, but I think we'll see Harvey in a lead role and maybe 15 or so touches, and he can catch passes as well. So I'm not too worried about it being a bad matchup against the Chiefs in terms of rushing, because he should be able to catch a few passes, especially if they get into a negative game script against the Chiefs. He did have a week 4, very good week 4 game against the Bengals. I mean, I know it's the Bengals, but they weren't afraid to give him 18 touches in that game for 98 yards and a touchdown, playing just 40% of the snaps. So, and he also has 5 total touchdowns in his last 4 games. So a threat to score touchdowns as well. So RJ Harvey this week.
Yeah, the matchup was definitely the first thing where I was like, oh, no J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, in immediately for Lions, and that's how they were playing Kansas City. Personally, I got a little concerned about it as well. I was like, it's not like a great matchup to really just be throwing in. Technically the backup, even though he was drafted in the second round, still the backup who hasn't had that opportunity yet this year. Tough, but I like the call, the confidence call to throw in R.J. Harvey, and in Kansas City, they just gave up 114 yards to James Cook last week. So there is the upside. It only takes 1 or 2 plays, kind of like Travion Henderson. You only need just a couple of plays. It's kind of the same way with R.J. Harvey, especially with his receiving ability in a game script where they're probably going to have to throw a little bit more to keep up with KC. So I like the call a lot for a confidence play in R.J. Harvey. My running back sneaky start might also not be super sneaky either, but it's Woody Marks, who gets the Tennessee Titans, who are 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed. He has officially taken over this Houston Texans backfield over Nick Chubb. He's had 10 or more rush attempts in 4 straight games and 5 of his last 6. He's had 15 or more opportunities in 4 of his last 6 games. And Tennessee, as just mentioned, they're 30th in AFPA. Awful against the running back position. And Marks in the first game against the Titans this year had 21 touches for 120 total yards and 2 touchdowns. So I expect volume and efficiency on the ground, especially if the Texans are winning and they, turn to the run game a little bit more with Woody Marks. Or if Tennessee somehow is keeping this game close, Marks also has the receiving upside as well, that he can catch some passes out of the backfield I don't know if Davis Mills is going to play again this week or not. Regardless of who it is, I still think Woody Marks is going to see a decent amount of volume, opportunity, efficiency, scoring possibilities as well, that I think he's a very solid top 20 play this week.
Yeah, it looks like Davis Mills, CJ Stroud is still dealing with concussion symptoms, so it doesn't look like he's going to clear. And usually they miss 1 game, and sometimes they miss more if the concussion symptoms are lingering. And it looks like with Stroud it is. I did write up Woody Marks, and I was going to take him, but you had already picked him. I was late to the party in terms of picking the sneaky starts this week, so I think it's a great call. 80% of the snaps he played last week. I wrote at the start of this blurb, Woody Marks' full takeover of the Houston backfield may finally be happening, and he was basically splitting time with Nick Chubb all year, but then he played 80% of the snaps last week and handled 16 of the team's 22 backfield touches. So I like it a lot. And I wanted to throw one more in there, and I'm a little scared to do this, but maybe if it works out, you can clip this. And if it doesn't, we can just flush it down the toilet to the Annals of Time or Annals of Time. Emari Demercardo this week. I want this to happen. This guy had 104 yards on like 7 touches last week. He's averaging 6.9 yards per carry on 108 career carries. Bam Knight has an ankle injury. Trey Benson's not practicing yet or not going to come back this week for sure. And we are equally likely to see Michael Carter lead this backfield if Donovan Knight is out. But I would love to see the Cardinals finally hand the keys to the backfield. Give Demercado like 12 to 15 touches against a kind of a shaky 49ers rush defense. They've given up an average of 133 total yards, 0.75 touchdowns in the last 4 games. So I just want to see Demercado with 10 or 12 carries, 3 or 4 catches, and see what he can do.
We were debating Demercado, like back after the Benson injury, we were debating, what is it, Demercado, is it Michael Carter, blah, 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 blah. And we had mentioned that Demercado has done well in his starts, for the past couple of years. So, and I think he's done well outside of the dropped ball at the goal line, which I still watch that clip sometimes. And I think I see maybe a frame or two where that ball actually crosses the goal line and then they just call it back. Anyway, the play was utterly stupid. I'm not going to defend it. But I mean, if he didn't have that, I feel like our perception of Emari Demercardo would be a little bit more positive here. To where, if he is going to get the bulk of the work this week, that he could be, definitely a desperation play. And when he does well, we can clip this and then we will show how smart you truly are, John. So let's move on to the wide receiver position. Then we can. I don't want to super spoil your pick, but we can keep it in that same game. It's a nice transition. So why don't you hit us with your wide receiver?
I wrote this up, published it, and then this news broke about Marvin Harrison having appendicitis and having surgery and is going to be out this week and maybe longer. And so I wrote up Michael Wilson for the Cardinals, who has been playing better and has a better rapport with Jacoby Brissett than he did with Kyler Murray. In the last 4 games, he had caught 4 for 44, 3 for 40, 3 for 61, and 4 for 34. He's caught this is from Brissett. He has caught 14 of 20 targets from Brissett. And obviously this is going to be Trey McBride's offense, and he's going to be the must start in this group. But if you're looking for another option, Zay Jones is also out with an Achilles injury. So this is really setting up for Michael Wilson to be the number 2 target in this offense. And, they may need him because the 49ers offense is pretty good and can put up some points. So if we see the Cardinals fall into negative game script, maybe you get a game with Michael Wilson getting 8 to 10 targets alongside Trey McBride.
Yep, I like Michael Wilson a lot. He's been a guy from the Dynasty side where I do the Dynasty waiver wire article and video for DLF, and I have mentioned him several times over the past couple of years as a guy that just constantly is between, is he rosterable in Dynasty or not? And he has his moments for sure. And if you can pick out those moments, especially in a game without Marvin Harrison Jr., with Jacoby Brissett, who seems to have kind of invigorated some life into this Cardinals offense from a fantasy perspective, it's definitely not a bad play at all. My wide receiver this week is Khalil Shakir. Again, maybe not super sneaky, but I mean, he hasn't been like the most like amazing kind of wide receiver. He's just always feels like he's in like the wide receiver 3 range. And nobody ever really talks about him. You just kind of play him if you don't really have anybody better. He's been super safe. He's been very reliable. He's had 6+ receptions in 4 of his last 5 games, and I believe 5 or more receptions in 5 of his last 6. His numbers also slightly improve in games without Dalton Kincaid over the past couple of years. Since 2023, he is averaging 2 more targets per game and an extra half of fantasy point per game in the 4 games without Dalton Kincaid. So not like a massive bump up with Kincaid out, but what Shakir has already been doing for the Bills offense as their kind of wide receiver 1, essentially. And now you remove Kincaid. It just kind of condenses the targets a little bit more. I also, just from a narrative standpoint, really like the idea of the Buffalo Bills traveling back home after a terrible road division loss. And they're playing against a defense that is very easy to beat in the past in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're 22nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. But they're also playing an offense that can score against Buffalo too. So we have a potentially high-scoring game here, a shootout opportunity Lots of fantasy points could be scored, and I think that Khalil Shakir could be, a better than just, I'll start that guy at my wide receiver position this week. I think he's a very trustworthy start for wide receivers.
Yeah, I wrote him up, but I also wrote up Keon Coleman just as in parentheses, or Keon Coleman if Khalil Shakir is unable to play. He has a rib injury and was in a red no contact jersey yesterday, but the fact that he's practicing at all is a pretty good indicator that they are planning on him playing. So I expect him to be out there right now. He is the fantasy wide receiver 21 since week 3. His per game production is wide receiver 28 in that span. So he's just a rock solid, high floor fantasy wide receiver 3 who occasionally pops up and catches a touchdown or has a long gainer and gets you a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 type game.
Before we move on, John, you gave me a little bit of confidence to throw out who my alternative wide receiver was with your Emari Demercardo take. So I feel like I could maybe do the same thing. I was debating. I almost threw him out there, and so I've got confidence now. I think Tyler Lockett could be the play for Vegas this week against the Dallas Cowboys on Monday night. I know people are kind of still interested in Trey Tucker, but now that Tyler Lockett has joined the Raiders, I mean, he only played 30% of snaps in week 9 for them in his first game for the Raiders, only had 1 target. Then last week against the Broncos, 56% of snaps, had 6 targets, 5 receptions for 44 yards. Like I said, against the Dallas Cowboys, who gave up 7 for 96 and 1 the week before their bye in week 9. 6 for 89 and 2 to Troy Franklin. Sorry, that was I don't know if I mentioned that was the Marvin Harrison Jr. 7 for 96 and 1. Franklin 6 for 89 and 2. They gave up 3 for 60 to Jalen Lane and 2 for 60 to Chris Moore in the Commanders game. Tedro McMillan scored twice on them. Garrett Wilson had 6 for 70 and 1. Romeo Doubs had his 3 touchdown game against them. So we know how bad the Dallas Cowboys offense is. And you have to be in a certain situation to then have Tyler Lockett in your lineup this week. But I wanted to throw him out there as a possible sneaky start at the wide receiver position like you did with Emari Demercardo.
Yeah, I did not write up Tyler Lockett. I wrote up Trey Tucker, but I did mention Tyler Lockett as a cover my butt type sentence at the end of that statement. I said Tyler Lockett is also worth a look in deeper formats given his built-in rapport with Jonnu Smith and his team high 6 targets last week against the Broncos. So if he gets that sort of 6 to 8 target and with a pretty efficient relationship that he has with Jonnu Smith against a really bad Dallas defense, he could pop his head up for a vintage Tyler Lockett game. It's just been a while since we've seen that from him. I think I'm going to start Trey Tucker in a couple leagues, just hoping that we can get one of these monster 3 touchdown games that he had earlier in the season, but it's been a little quiet since then.
All right, so we're going to move on to the Bleacher Nation fantasy card after wrapping up our technically 10 players for week 11 sneaky starts in JJ McCarthy, Tua, Luke Musgrave. I guess it's technically 11 players because I had Muth and Jonnu, but I specifically wanted to play Freiermuth at tight end. RJ Harvey, Woody Marks, and Emari Demercardo shout out, Michael Wilson, Khalil Shakir, and a Tyler Lockett shout out. So moving on to Bleacher Nation Fantasy then, if you're unfamiliar with Bleacher Nation Fantasy app, they have a pick'em style game very similar to Prize Picks or Underdog, where you can go through the entire slate of games, look at every single player's yards or receptions or longest reception, longest rush, all that kind of stuff. Just hit more or less, build out your card, get a payout multiplier based on how many legs are in your card, and you are playing on the Bleacher Nation app. So right now they are running a promotion where you get a 50% deposit match up to $250 with code SWISH. And then they are running a promotion on Sunday for the Sunday night game for Jahmyr Gibbs more than half a rushing yard. That is for new users only. But if you are a new user and you're signing up or you have signed up already but have yet to play a card, you would qualify for that promo leg of Jahmyr Gibbs, more than half a rushing yard. So then, John, why don't you hit us with leg number 2 for this card for this week?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the Commanders defense, target them with Devon Achane, more than 79.5 rushing yards. You could also maybe go with the rush pass combo yards or even go with the pass yards if you prefer that. But I think he's going to have a big game against the Commanders. They gave up 142 yards to Jahmyr Gibbs rushing. They gave up 71 to David Montgomery, the second running back for the Lions, almost made this number. They back in week 8 against Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, those two combined for 98 yards. Javonte Williams had 116 yards back in week 7, and DeAndre Swift had 108 yards in week 6. They're giving up, since week 6, 5.5 yards per carry to enemy running backs. So this is a good one. Unless they just go, crazy with the pass-heavy game plan, if he gets his 15 to 18 carries, he should be able to beat this number, 79.5.
All it takes is just a couple runs with a player like Devon Achane. I like it a lot against that Commanders defense. So my leg is going to be Emeka Egbuka more than 62.5 receiving yards. I think I maybe played this earlier in the year when I see Egbuka in the low 60s. I'm just going to take Egbuka more than the low 60s receiving yards. He's hit this in 5 out of 9 games this year. But the couple of games that he did not hit this were the games prior to the bye where he was kind of dealing through that injury and playing through it. He was still getting a ton of targets, but he wasn't really doing anything with them. Him and Baker just didn't have that synergy. And Egbuka was also playing hurt. But then he had the bye week. Then he comes out week 10 after the bye, 115 yards on 13 targets. Buffalo has also allowed the primary opposing wide receiver 1 to hit 80-plus receiving yards in 5 straight games. So I think just with the fact that, Buffalo is going to put up a lot of points on Tampa, Tampa's going to need to respond. So Emeka Egbuka more than 62.5 receiving yards. So that is going to be the Bleacher Nation card for this week. You got the Jahmyr Gibbs promo leg of more than half a rushing yard for new users only. Devon Achane more than 79.5 rushing yards, and Emeka Egbuka more than 62.5 receiving yards. So that's going to wrap things up for this week's Week 11 Sneaky Starts. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening or watching. And we will catch you guys next week for Week 12 Sneaky Starts on the Most Accurate Podcast. Peace.